happy to see you here. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I am Alice Lesdinya from TechHub Riga. I normally run the space on a daily basis with a bunch of other nice people and some board members over there. As you see, we have just moved to the new building and new premises. It's the staircase is still under renovation a little bit, so you saw it, it's all right. We like to launch it as MVP, so we fix the bugs later on. But I'm happy that we are in the new space, and we are very excited. But today, for this next hour, we are actually launching a new organization here in Riga, in Latvia, and it's called Silicon Vikings. And what is Silicon Vikings? It's a network of entrepreneurs or interesting, excited people who want to make connections between Silicon Valley and Nordics. So we have Richard Allen Horning here, whom I will give the word next. He's the president for Silicon Vikings. He launched it 15 years ago. It's a global network. But my idea with Silicon Vikings in Riga here is to help you, startups and entrepreneurs, to create better connections with Silicon Valley or US in general. So if you have a need for contacts there, please approach. As for how these Silicon Vikings Riga will look like in the future, I imagine it as regular event, more or less regular event, with interesting speakers who can share some experiences about US and Silicon Valley, or somebody who has been doing business with them, so that it's so we can create better connection with Silicon Valley over there. And today we will also have another speaker who is from US, Gary Whitehill. I don't see him in the room yet, but he's on the way probably, and he will share you his experiences. There he is behind the glass. He will share his experiences about connecting with Silicon Valley. Anyways, I'm open for ideas also for how to continue moving this organization farther on, as this is the first event. It's a trial, sort of, and let's see how it goes. Welcome on stage, Richard Allen Horning. Please applause.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to have to learn how to use the clicker. Just click. Okay, there we go. Okay. My day job is as a practicing lawyer in Silicon Valley, and you might guess from my gray hair and lack of it that I've been doing it for a long time. And the truth is that I've been practicing law in Silicon Valley since Silicon Valley was invented, and that date happens to be January 11th, 1971, which is the first time the word Silicon Valley appeared in print to talk about what's been going on in this area that started in Palo Alto and now has consumed the entire Northern California community. In fact, in the last quarter, the venture capital community, which occupies a lot of space on Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, next to the Stanford campus, invested something like $11 billion. Traditionally, that number was about 35% allocated to Silicon Valley, which includes San Francisco. This last quarter, it was 58%. And San Francisco itself got more than half of the money. So there's been a big shift in the allocation of money and where the investment is going. But I digress. What we've discovered in the many years that I've been doing this in Silicon Valley is the success of entrepreneurship is very much a community project. It's about, okay, let's see here. Where am I supposed to point this thing? Next. There we go. What we've discovered in Silicon Valley is building an entrepreneurial culture is very much a community project. And it involves this thing called networking and building networks where you can make connections with the people who can help you advance your particular project. A fairly famous study was done at my alma mater, Berkeley, by a professor named Annalise Saxenian. It's called Regional Advantage. And in that study, in the book, she describes a comparison between Silicon Valley and Route 128 outside of Boston, where the tech community actually started and where venture capital actually started. And she said the reason that Silicon Valley succeeded and Boston did not is because of the emphasis on networking, the networking culture that exists in Silicon Valley, that because of the geography of the Boston area, makes it very difficult to do. We have this compact community in Silicon Valley. So what's Silicon Vikings about? It's a network of nodes with the mission of building a borderless community supporting Nordic and Baltic innovation and entrepreneurship, with a close connection to Silicon Valley's unique culture. See if I can make it click again. Okay, here we are. This is a depiction of where we have these nodes. We launched the node in Helsinki on Tuesday at Slush. We had about 85 people in attendance. They too are going to have a program that they're developing that's suited to the local circumstances in their community. Okay, next. There we go. So what do? We connect. We collaborate. Next. We create. And what do we create? We create a lot of events that bring people together to share knowledge and connections. We serve as a go-to channel to learn about what's going on in the ecosystem. And we do projects that promote, inspire, and add value and knowledge to the different players in the community. Next. Whoop, too far. And we communicate. Silicon Vikings was founded in 1998. It was founded as a Swedish project. It was founded by two former presidents of the Swedish-American Chamber of Commerce. They decided that the Swedish-American Chamber of Commerce was not useful to the tech community and was not useful to Silicon Valley for two reasons. One is they were ignoring Silicon Valley, concentrating only on events that were happening in San Francisco. And second, it was a social club as opposed to a business networking organization. So they decided to establish Silicon Vikings as a business networking organization connecting, in the beginning, Sweden with Silicon Valley. And Sweden was a logical candidate to start because the Swedish population in Silicon Valley is the largest population from the Nordic and Baltic regions. Today, we have 5,000 members, which are evenly split between Silicon Valley and the Nordic Baltic regions. We have 15,000 followers on our media channels. And as you can see from this item, we get a lot of viewing of the activity that we undertake. We've got 10,000 email addresses on our distribution list, and we hold 50 or 60 events each year with roughly 4,000 attendees. So we have a very active agenda in Silicon Valley itself. Next. So what is this about the nodes? This is one thing to have all this activity in Silicon Valley, but what does it have to do with here? What does it have to do with Stockholm? What does it have to do with Oslo? What does it have to do with Copenhagen? What does it have to do with Helsinki? What does it have to do with Tallinn? What it has to do with is the idea that innovation and entrepreneurship is a global project, and that the areas of the world that encompass the Nordic and Baltic region are places where there's a lot of interesting innovation going on, where we can all learn from each other, where we can follow developments that will inspire others to do things. And by having these nodes, they used to be called chapters, became politically incorrect to call them chapters because they each are independent of the others, but they collaborate with each other. They organize themselves in the way that's conducive to the local community. They have a leadership team that is selected locally, and the brand is shared across the nodes. Next. So, what are the nodes supposed to do? They're supposed to provide value to the local constituencies and their members, as well as connect with the other nodes on the network. Their activities, as I envision them, and as has played out in the existing nodes, Stockholm was the first, then came Copenhagen, then Oslo, last summer Tallinn, and on Tuesday, Helsinki. Each one of them has developed because there was someone or group of people who thought it would be interesting to have a relationship with the Silicon Vikings node in Silicon Valley. It was time. I've been talking with people here about the idea of having a node in Riga for several years. I got introduced to Riga through my good friends at Startup Wise Guys. And I've been at the launch of all but one of the chapters. The one I missed was Estonia last summer. Even though I'm the honorary counsel for Estonia in Silicon Valley, I couldn't make it last summer. So I sent Steve Jurvetson instead from Draper Fisher Jurvetson, probably one of the more noted venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, who happens to be Estonian. Anyway, so in each case, the idea has been someone has stepped forward and said, you know, it'd be really interesting that we would have a node of Silicon Vikings here in our home community, that we would undertake events and programs in our home community, and we would have this connection with you all, y'all, as they say in Texas, in Silicon Valley. So what's entailed? Collaboration, connecting, using technologies to monitor and share developments, and collaborating on events. And one of the things that we do a lot of is when groups come to Silicon Valley, we host events where we showcase what they're doing. For example, last summer, the folks at Startup Sana in Helsinki came over. One of the board members is a good friend of mine, and she said, I'm bringing 7 teams from Startup Sana. Could Silicon Vikings host an event? So we had an event at our office in Palo Alto. We had 85 people there. We had the 7 teams from Startup Sana talk informally about what they were doing. It wasn't a pitch contest. It wasn't an interaction, other than questions asked from the audience. It was, so what are the cool things we're working on? And then after the presentations, as happens at events like that, little clusters formed around the entrepreneurs talking about how it is, what's interesting about your project, and how is it that we can help you here in Silicon Valley advance what you're doing. Who do you need to be connected to? How can I use my list of contacts to help you get connected? And that's what networking, business networking is all about at the end of the day. So, next. So what do we expect to happen out of this? Create greater awareness of the activities that are going on and the interesting developments that are happening in each of these regions. Creating mutual benefits by cross-participation. Organizing pitching events. And organizing global node meetings at places like Slush and Latitude 59, which is a conference that I run every year in Tallinn with Enterprise Estonia. And basically the idea is we're looking to you to design the program that is conducive to your conditions. We're in a position to be supportive of what you're doing. We want to be supportive of what you're doing. We need to find ways that we can connect with you, and we want to be and will be in a position to connect you when you come to Silicon Valley. So, last slide. Here's who our sponsors are and partners in Silicon Valley. A little bit about the organization. We are a not-for-profit a volunteer organization. We've had several executive directors. We found that as a volunteer organization, as with many young companies, even though we've been around for a long time, we have a question of what is our revenue model? How do we organize, get enough revenue in to pay our executive director? And that has been, frankly, a challenge. And so we lost our first executive director to SV Forum, and our most recent executive director found that when she got divorced with a young child, she couldn't sustain herself on the meager amount that we were paying her. So we're now looking for a new executive director who might be able to live on the meager amount that we can pay her. Because how do we get our revenue? We get our revenue by sponsorship money that we collect from this group. We get our revenue by asking people to donate $20 or $40 or more when we have events. You know, the gate at the door. We put on events for groups. They call us and say, hey, Silicon Vikings, can you organize an event for these teams that are coming? Innovation Center, Denmark, et cetera, and they pay us a modest sum of money to organize events for them, where we have the network and the email lists and the connections to draw a big crowd that's supportive of, for example, Innovation Center put on a healthcare program at the Santa Clara Sheraton, and we organized the event for them. So these are our revenue streams, but it is insufficient to have somebody who is a full-time person, so we're looking for people who share our enthusiasm and our ability to organize events, and you will organize your node here in a way that's conducive to you. So that's my pitch about Silicon Vikings. Any questions? Okay, good. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Regarding the supporters and sponsors and partners, we have some really good partners also who are supporting this initiative of Silicon Vikings here in Riga. First of them, of course, is TechHub. That's why we're holding the event here. So thank you, TechHub Riga, for hosting us for now. Then we also have AmCham. There's Liga from AmCham over here. Do you have a couple of words to say, or? Welcome. Welcome. Okay. And also thank you for Raidla Lange and Norcus, whose legal company, and they are supporting this initiative. So thank you, everyone. Probably there will be some more partners along the way who can help bring great speakers. So speaking of great speakers, we have Gary Whitehill over here. Gary, let's have you on the stage.
Dim the lights, please. It's going to be hard for everybody to see. Can everybody hear me like this? Is it okay? Can you hear me in the back? This microphone's not very good. So. All right, can we dim these lights, please? Nobody's going to be able to see 3/4 of the presentation. Okay, cool. So, hello, Riga.
Yay.
I'm on a country speaking tour for 60 days. This is my 19th city and my 56th or 57th day. And I go to Budapest, and then my tour's pretty much over. So I've been everywhere from Spain to Kiev to Moscow, Prague, Philippines, Vietnam, kind of all over the place. And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about how to create your own reality. Hopefully you guys can see that. The interesting thing about being an entrepreneur and how you create your reality is this is what you think you should be doing. Right? What happens is when you're building a company, you get very myopic, you get very focused. start reading the stuff in TechCrunch, you start reading what people tell you in DLD or Web Summit or whatever you guys call here, slush, and supposedly people tell you how to build a real company. So the interesting thing about when you get myopic is the fact that what you do is you actually force yourself to do the opposite of what's actually going to make you successful. And just in case you think the folks at DLD or any of these other places know what they're talking about, how to build a company, let's talk a little bit about statistics. 432 million entrepreneurs attempt to start 305 million businesses a year. Of those 305 million businesses, only 100 million of them actually launch. Of those 100 million, only 1 in 1,000 actually ever become sustainable. And of those 1 in 1,000, only another 1 in 1,000 ever raise any money. So when you look at those statistics, your odds of actually building a sustainable company and being sustainable are 1 in a million. Pretty tough. So that's why I have this next slide, Buckminster Fuller. Fortunately, Bucky died the year I was born, 1983. What I like about what Bucky says is the fact that, you know, when you build a company, particularly in an emerging economy or an economy in Eastern Europe in general, you're looking for somebody to tell you kind of how to build a company, right? And the challenge is a lot of times you build a company in the wrong ways, in the wrong principled ways. Because the difference between Silicon Valley and here is that Silicon Valley is an anomaly. We're going to go through some other anomalies throughout this presentation. The reason why I put this up there is because in an environment like this, doing things the way that everybody else is telling you to do it, it's not going to work. That's not what's going to make you successful. And that's what this presentation is really about. My background is pretty uncommon. So my last company, I scaled to 4 continents in 2 years. I've built 8 companies in 8 separate industries. I've had 3 exits and everything from consumer products to retail, tattoo, aftercare. I owned an event company. I owned a newspaper group. I've also done corporate innovation. So I built a program with Michael Dell engaging early stage entrepreneurs, both startups, then Series A, Series B, Series B, backed companies, and we scaled that from $1 million in revenue to $250 million in 3 years, which is unheard of in a public company. I also do local, state, federal, global policy work on entrepreneurship and innovation as well. I've built startups, scaled them globally. I've invested in startups globally. I've done policy globally. So everything you're about to see right now is something different than you're going to see from just about anybody else. And it's not because they're not well-intentioned. It's because the way in which you solve this paradigm, the only way you understand how to do this in a way that's meaningful is through enough experience. And the way in which people build companies in Silicon Valley, I can tell you right now, is not relevant to this ecosystem. Because you're just not at that stage. It's just a fact. The reason Silicon Valley Vikings is here is because you need an accelerant. Right? And that's one of the best accelerants you can have. So what we're going to talk about today is how to get to this fuzzy red middle that most people don't think about strategically. There's a very big difference between building a company for the sake of building a company, because people tell you how to build a company, and actually how to be strategic in building a company. What we're going to go through today is how you can actually be strategic, principled, aligned at all times, at all reasons. Because how you build a company is just a cycle. It's just a cycle. Every entrepreneur goes through the same steps for the same reasons, no matter whether they have $100 million in revenue or they're just starting out. Everybody is forced to go through the same steps. So that's what we're going to talk about. The first thing that I always like to start out with is talking a little bit about goals. The biggest problem we have in entrepreneurship today is we think about timeline and money. My friend from the Silicon Valley Vikings will tell you we just had lunch. Any system built on timeline or money will fail. It's only a matter of time. You didn't build a company to make money. You didn't build a company because you have a certain timeline. All of you built companies or are passionate about innovation and entrepreneurship because there's something in here, some future reality that all of you believe that isn't here yet. And what your job is to do is to convince people of whatever that irrational reality actually is. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple minutes real quick and talk about goals. What I want you guys to do, pull out a phone or a piece of paper and just think about really quickly, what are the top 3 goals that you have personally for yourself and professionally for your business? Forever. What do you want to be known for? What's your legacy? What are your goals? Because I've never met an entrepreneur who started out building a company based on goals other than they wanted to get funding by some venture capital firm. Or they didn't know that they didn't plan to have a family 3 years into their business. Okay? And how that affects what they want to do. So you either start addressing what you want to do 20, 30, 40 years down the road when you first start a business, personally, and what you want to do 5, 10, 20 years down the road with your business, and you start doing that before you build a business, or you already start from an unprincipled way. And I've actually never met an entrepreneur that started a business from a principled way. So take a couple minutes and just think really quickly, write down the top 3 things that you want to be known for, personally, professionally. Real simple, and we'll go from there. Give you guys 1 more minute and we got to get going. We've got a short time. All right, guys, we got to get going. So, what's interesting is I give presentations all over the world, right? And I always start out my presentations, whether it's 5 people, 50 people, 500 people, or 5,000 people that I'm speaking in front of. I do the same exercise every single time. The funny thing about this exercise is 1/3 of people never do it. You can tell the people who are doing it because they're sitting there talking to one another, or they have this blank stare on their face and they go, shit, I never thought about this. I don't know what to do. Right? And then there's other people who are too afraid to ask those questions, who just don't do anything. You can always tell those people. And the interesting thing about those 1/3 of people, that's what's going to happen to you. Okay? If you don't start asking the hard questions, you're going to fail. And not this type of failure where you learn repeat and all that brouhaha stuff that you see with lean startup. You fail. That's it. Fact. And you're lucky if you can get back up. Okay? The funny thing about being a human being is it's very hard for us to ask questions that aren't in our own best interest. Think about that. You don't know how to accept, biologically, you don't know how to accept something that's not in your own best interest. So the reason why 1/3 of people never pick up a pen and a paper and ask the hard question, they're scared. And the funny thing about being scared is that's what runs the world, right? The reason we see so much ego these days is because people are just based in fear. It's just a 4-letter word. I'm going to tell you real quick why it's so important you do your top 3. Okay? Because you hear a lot of people these days, they talk about passion, they talk about purpose, they talk about contribution. What's the problem with that? None of that's tangible, right? That's that foo-foo-y stuff that VCs don't understand, you can't put in a spreadsheet, and MBAs can't quantify. Well, here's the funny thing about passion and purpose and whatever you just wrote down. Because passion and purpose in a business, that's what builds your vision and your mission. And over that, what builds your vision and mission? That builds your culture. So your culture, what happens? You hire the right people. So then what happens? You build the right products. You build the right products, what happens? Then you can be strategic. Then all of a sudden you understand KPIs and milestones that actually matter. That's when you start focusing on lean startup and all these other things that are up on that wall. Not until then. Right now, you guys are starting to focus on that stuff there. Last but not least, that's when you engage customers. Because then customers can be emotive about your story that's all the way the heck back here. And if you have customers who are emotive, that's when you make money. Step 7 in that chart is making money and worrying about money. Most startups start with worrying about making money, and timelines and all that stuff is step 1. It doesn't work that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about entrepreneur's journey real quick. Right? You have to re-hardwire your brain. It's a call to arms. You're going to have to do a lot of things that are uncomfortable. Entrepreneurship just in itself is a very uncomfortable sport. It's the hardest sport in the world. You know why? Because your brain's hardwired from 100,000 years ago. Risk? We literally do not understand risk. Not to mention, we only understand 1% of the brain. We don't understand 99.9% of the brain almost. And we've only been studying the brain for 50 years. So there's not too much we understand about psychology. Step 2, trials and tribulations, and the frustration of opposition. When you start to do things differently, the system bucks back at you. When you want to be an entrepreneur, your job is to do something differently than everybody else. If you want to follow the herd, that's cool. You can raise a lot of money by following the herd, but most of the businesses that just follow the herd, they fail. Step 3 of the journey that we're going to talk about real quick is the return. What happens is when you start off doing things from a principled way that's different than everybody else, and then you have the courage to step into your power and do things differently even though they tell you you shouldn't, what happens is eventually you get reintegrated. And the people who used to fight against you, fight for you. Because they realize that you've done things differently and you continue to have the courage in a way you didn't before. So that's the journey we're going to go through real quick. We only got 20 minutes or so. First thing you have to understand about you sitting in this room right now is that you're not ordinary. 99.9% of human beings do not think like you. They don't act like you, they don't understand you, they're never going to understand you. The thing about great leaders is that they understand that's a responsibility. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to be insular. It's not an excuse to feel bad about yourself. It's not an excuse to do anything besides have the courage to actually step into your power and do something different. Because by sitting in this room, being that 0.001% of people that does things differently, but we don't work for the man. And that's pretty cool, right? That's a responsibility. It's a responsibility because we're fortunate. We're fortunate to be in this room right now. I'm fortunate every day. I thank my lucky stars that I don't ever have to work for the man. And I never have. And I never will. So what you have to understand is you're beautiful as you are. And as foo-foo as that sounds, it's true. Right? Beauty. What does beauty mean in a business? Beauty's not tangible either, just like that passion and purpose stuff, right? So, let's talk about that real quick. How many of you would build a pyramid on quicksand? Raise your hand. Anybody?
On quick what?
Nobody. Maybe. Maybe? Oh, I would. All right. So there's two ways you build a business. You build it kind of on this foo-foo-y stuff called quicksand, or you build it on a solid rock foundation, right? And on a rock foundation, there's always four things that matter. Mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. The funny thing about entrepreneurship is the only thing you've ever probably talked about in this room is about tactics, how to build a company. Maybe you've talked a little bit about mentality. You've certainly never talked about your inner critic and your emotions. And you've certainly never talked about spirituality either. The funny thing is, if you Google the name Oprah, Jack Dorsey, whatever person you want to think of, and put the word meditation right next to it, there's a reason why they meditate, folks. There's a reason why I meditate too. And it's really important that you understand that part of things, because you can do all you want mentally and have a good company, but there's three other parts. So you have a V12 engine, you're only using 3 volts of that. What happens is in most companies, I call it the 2-year cycle. What happens is most companies, they just start on the mental side. Right? They don't understand what this statement means. They think beauty just means raising a lot of money and hiring a lot of employees and having a high burn rate. And if it works, it works. Well, the statistics prove that 1 in a million is actually your odds. Right? So if you're going to build a company from a principled way, you have to start thinking about more things than just money. And the funny thing is, the more money you raise and the quicker you raise it, the harder you fall. Because what you'll find is most businesses, VC-backed businesses, they rise really, really quickly, and there's all this press and this and that, and they're God's gift to the universe, and then 2 or 4 years they fall. And they fail, and you never hear from those founders again. Nobody ever tells you those stories. Nobody ever has interviewed one of the guys in Silicon Valley, and my friend here can tell you those stories too, of the folks who actually unwind VC portfolio companies. Nobody tells you about going bankrupt. Nobody tells you about the divorces. Nobody tells you about the suicides. It happens, folks. And it happens because people are unprincipled. The media wants you to think it's just this glamorous thing and this and that. It's not. It's really, really hard work. And it starts with understanding this statement. Because if you're not straight up here, the rest doesn't matter. The reason we started with a top 5 or top 3 is because if you're not principled about who you are as a founder, as a visionary, how's your culture going to be principled? How's your team going to be principled? How's your product going to be principled? And how are your customers going to be principled? It all builds on top of one another, folks. It's really simple. You have to understand that life's going to be an adventure. I don't think you guys can read this, but what this says is that entrepreneurship is not a destination, it's a guide to follow. Right? Somehow we think about entrepreneurship as this linear trajectory where we build something, we raise a little bit of money, we get customers, and then all of a sudden magically we exit. But that's not the way the world works. Right? It's really, truly an adventure. We literally think, and this is the way it's portrayed, it's just like this. It's just one foot in front of the other. It doesn't work that way. Never has worked that way. Silicon Valley in general doesn't work that way. Right? Because startups are much more dynamic. You know, I take some time and I study nonlinear dynamics a lot of times. And I study quantum physics. And the reason I do that is because here's how most of you are thinking about building your company right now. Think about it like a marathon. How many of you have heard of the company called Microsoft? Raise your hand. Everybody has. And everybody always laughs about Microsoft, right? It's always funny with it. I mean, you know what I found? I gotta tell you, on this tour, I found a couple universal things. One's the Backstreet Boys. Everybody knows the song I Want It That Way. You all do, and you know you do. And everybody has an opinion about Microsoft. And anybody who knows somebody who's worked in Bellevue, Washington, knows a term called death marches. And death marches in Microsoft mean that whether it's 96 hours or more than that, if there's a product launch and you don't have time to eat, you don't eat. If your kid needs to be fed, doesn't matter, figure it out. If you can't sleep, oh well. If you have to sleep under your desk, too bad. Microsoft doesn't care about you, it cares about following this linear trajectory. Because what Microsoft says is you can just plot out at any given time, week 1 you do this, week 2 you do this, week 3 you do this, week 4 you do this. You just keep going up the chain, week by week by week by week by week. All they do is whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. You know what that's called? That's called broadcasting. That's just throwing stuff in the air. That's not being strategic. That's being completely unprincipled. Right? Here's what happens when you raise VC money. What happens when you raise VC money is you put gas on the fire real quick. Because odds are you didn't start from a very principled place of how you built your business in the first place. So then when you put gas on the fire, all of a sudden, you know what you need to do? You need a backfill. What happens is you start off with this trajectory. What happens is the money compounds the problems that you didn't figure out in the first place because you weren't very principled around your top 5, around your culture, around your vision and your values. And then what happens is your customer base and your product is a little bit off. But when you have to scale so quickly, you have to go from $1 million in revenue to 10 million in revenue in 6 months. And if you don't, they pull your funding. All of a sudden, you have to make some really strategic decisions. But it's hard to make strategic decisions when you haven't been principled already. So what has to happen? You have to backfill. And you know what's funny about when you have to backfill and you have to do a lot of things really, really quickly to make up for things that you didn't do before? You know what that's called? It's called a Ponzi scheme. It is. That's what I call 1 in a million chance, building a sustainable business that's funded. Here's how things really work. Folks, life and how you build a business is a series of well-timed sprints. It's how you engage customers with a marketing strategy, a product strategy, a community management strategy. Why is that? It's just psychology. Right? Who builds companies? People. Who builds products? People. Who buys products? People. Who decides whether a product is good in the market or not? People. And you know how people think? Like this. Humans are able to absorb some information, then they have to let it ferment. And then they're ready for more information. Whatever that information is. Then ferment. It builds on top of one another. The challenge is when you're unprincipled from the start, it's hard to then be strategic in sprints. Because you're so forced to just push things through the funnel. And so what happens is when you think about entrepreneurship as this linear thing and not as just this big adventure, it's hard to think about it in sprints. But sprints is really, from an engineering perspective, I'll tell you what, sprints are the most genius thing in the world. Scrum and all those types of things, I'll tell you what, there's a reason they work. The problem is, most of you are probably have more than 10, they're going to know this, right? It's all about releasing control. Because between 1 and 10 employees, you control everything. And that's how you became successful. Right? What happens is above 10 employees, all of a sudden you have to understand how to release control. The biggest problem entrepreneurs have, particularly visionary founders, releasing control. They don't know how to empower people. They're so used to doing everything all the time. Right? That's why the 4 paradigms, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, are so important, because you can't release control just thinking from a business perspective. You can't release control just thinking from an emotional perspective. How you build a business is a whole slew of things. Okay? Refuse the status quo. Problems cannot be solved at the level in which folks thought before. The reason you guys are in this room is because you want to make a difference in the world. It's hard sometimes to have the courage to step in front of an investor, even your own team, and tell them differently than they've ever heard before, whatever that is. But it's your job as the CEO and the visionary to do the hard things, right? There's a reason they say it's lonely at the top. You don't build a company and scale to 4 continents by wanting to be everybody's friend. The world doesn't work that way. Sometimes you have to make tough choices. Sometimes you have to fire your best friend. I've had to do that before. But the reason you have to do that is because some people aren't ready for that journey. Some people aren't ready for this sprint. Some people don't know how to think like this, and that's okay. But in the best companies in the world, this is what they do. Right? And most of you want to do this. The reason you want to do that is because you want to change the world. You want to be efficient and effective in what you do. So you have to stand tall, right? You have to talk about that purpose. What you wrote down on a piece of paper, that's your core organizing principle in life, folks. It has to be. You have no other way to be successful in life than whatever you wrote down on that piece of paper. It's time and money. They're just byproducts. They're not goals. Time and money are not goals. They're byproducts of whatever you wrote down on that piece of paper, that vision that you had. I put up 2 quotes here. I don't know if you guys can read them or not. Can you guys read those in the back? No? All right, I'll read them real quick. Your vision will become clear only when you look in your heart. Who looks inside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And Peter Beagle said, I think that love is stronger than habits or circumstances. The reason I put this up there is because any entrepreneur who's been around the block a time or two will tell you, you really have no idea how to be your best friend. If you take a second and you think about how you treat your best friend right now, how much you would stick up for your best friend, if somebody punched your best friend in the face, or spit in their face, or did something, said something about them, I bet you'd react real quick, wouldn't you? Because they're your best friend. That's your job. That's what best friends do. But you don't treat yourself that way. That's what I've always found interesting about entrepreneurs. We're so based in just building a company, changing the world, that we forget about ourselves. We forget how to be our own best friend. You don't scale a company of 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 employees, folks, by not understanding how to be your own best friend. Because once again, it's lonely at the top, and it gets really dark. Right? And when it's really dark and it's really lonely, I can tell you that whatever business book, whatever MBA you've had, whatever your friends say, none of it matters. What matters is literally being able to put a chair in the middle of nature and just sit there and bawl your eyes out, like a little baby, like a 5-year-old who's lost. Because that's what great leaders actually do. Right? They really do. You have to. You have to know how to love yourself. Because the rest of the world, the ones that you're trying to convince to buy your products and services, they're not just going to love you just for the sake of the fact that you're a visionary. It doesn't work that way. Right? You have to have well-timed sprints that engage people and convince them. Can't be said any better than that. You only get one shot at life. I always like the quote where they say that you only need one shot at life if you do it right. Crossing the chasm of maturity. I think Bill Gates had this right. You probably can't read this one either. The reason why we start off with the top 5, folks, the reason why I've talked about marathons versus Ponzi schemes versus sprints is because Bill Gates quote right here. Great leaders understand how to cross the chasm of maturity. They understand that technology at the core of a business is really important. But they also understand that technology applied to an inefficient operation only magnifies that inefficiency. Technology applied to a fluid, principled operation scales that operation. That's how you scale a company to 4 continents in 2 years. You don't just put technology in there for technology's sake. You have to be very principled about how you use technology. If you look at today's systems, socially, environmentally, economically, the reason all these systems are breaking down or are about to blow up in 2017 is because we put technology at the core without having underlying principles outside of timeline and money. Unfortunately, most of our systems, that's what they're based on, particularly our economic systems. So we're running out of time. I'm going to make this really tangible for you guys real quick, though, how you can move forward with this. We already talked about your hopes and dreams, right? If you took the time to write down on that piece of paper, you already have a certain way in which you can move forward. The next thing you want to do is you want to print and post whatever you wrote down. Type it up on a piece of paper, size 72 font, Microsoft Word, print it out, post in 3 places. Place you sleep, not next to the drill. The place you sleep, the place you brush your teeth, and the door you go in and out of the most. And the reason you do that is because it's just psychology, folks. Whether you believe whatever you want your reality to be or not, if you just read that every day, and you're going to read it while you're at least brushing your teeth, right? Because I don't know what you do when you decide to stare at yourself while you're brushing your teeth. Your brain starts to re-hardwire itself. Business is just psychology. Consumers are just... But it's psychology over and over again in a systematic way. Odds are, you might see the piece of paper outside the door, you might see it by your bed, you might not. But you will, at least peripherally. And that's all your mind needs to start to change its own reality. That's just quantum physics. Surround yourself with the right people. What I like about people who have tattoos, by the way, how many people have tattoos? Raise your hand. Conservative audience, okay. It's funny, I was in Germany, I was speaking in front of about 250 people, and only 2 people raised their hands. And the weird thing about Germans, I guess supposedly 50% of people have tattoos. Right? I said, what kind of entrepreneurs are you? What kind of rich people are you? You don't have tattoos. The funny thing about tattoos is that people who have tattoos believe in something so much that they're willing to go through hours and hours and hours of pain to prove whatever it is that they believe. Most people don't just get butterflies, or whatever the heck it is. They get something on their body because they believe in it. It's tribalism. They believe so much that they're willing to go through hours and hours of pain. The thing about startups, the thing about building a successful company, the thing about building a successful life, is you're a summation of the 13 people you surround yourself with, folks. I can tell you probably less than half of those folks you surround yourself with right now are the right people to surround yourself with. It's true. Right? People either believe in what you just wrote down on that piece of paper or they don't. There's a reason I only talk to my college buddies once every 6 months. It's not because I don't respect them, it's not because I don't love them. It's because their place in my life can only be once every 6 months, because they still live at home, they drink beer, and they do those things. Right? Surrounding myself with those types of people is not what's going to help me continue to build great companies or help entrepreneurs around the world. As another example, in May, I was 48 hours away from getting engaged in Yellowstone National Park. The woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. Flew my mom out, my girlfriend's mother, grandmother, parents, yada, 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 everybody all ready to go. And I sat down, I had to have this conversation. Will she allow me to be the person who spends 90% of my time flying around the world re-hardwiring people's brains in a way in which they've never thought about building a business before or not? And unfortunately, she wasn't. She wanted the nice white picket fence and 2 kids and you just kind of hang out in America. America is pretty boring to me. So, 48 hours before I was supposed to be engaged, I had to let her go. And if you guys sitting here today think you're not going to have to make a decision like that in your life, particularly in your business, you're kidding yourself. Because how you become successful is making the hard decisions that nobody else wants to make. Nobody's ever going to tell you that. Nobody's going to tell you a story about like I just did. Because that's not what's going to get more people to build businesses. That's not what's going to get more businesses funded. That's not what's going to make more people be irrational about whether they can make it or not. It's hard to be an entrepreneur. It's hard to be successful. And that's okay. My job is not to tell you you're not going to be successful. My job is to tell you what's going to come. Because the pain always comes, folks. It has to. We're human. We want to be comfortable. We want to just be surrounded by people that are going to pat us on the back. but that's not how you grow. Okay? That's why you got to start with why. My friend Simon Sinek talks about start with why. What's your passion? What's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? I've always found the most interesting way to find people who believe what I believe is instead of talking about, hey, I'm the VP of sales, I'm the VP of engineering, whatever your job title is, it's really simple. You just say what you believe in less than 5 seconds. I believe every human deserves the opportunity to create. And the interesting thing is people either get it, and they're like, oh, well, blah, 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 or they look at me and they go, their face glazes over, and it's kind of, they have nothing to say because they don't understand it. It's the easiest networking tool in the world to talk about what you actually believe versus what you actually do. But you have to have courage to talk about what you believe. Because what you believe, that makes you vulnerable. We think sitting behind a computer and writing code makes us vulnerable. That's not vulnerable, folks. Networking and talking about what you believe makes you vulnerable. Let's stop with this last slide here. I know we're running out of time. Great leaders do all 6 of these things. Most entrepreneurs don't have more than 2. Usually all they have is intelligence and curiosity. Most successful entrepreneurs in the world at some point, they got grit somewhere. At some point, usually in their childhood, got beat by their dad, got molested, something batshit crazy. It's true. That's why most entrepreneurs are that irrational. Because if you study quantum physics, opportunity happens right before the inflection point of chaos. Okay? Chaos mentally, best entrepreneurs, they understand how to harness the chaos that they had in childhood. They understand how to take that trauma and turn it into something positive. But it's no coincidence, folks, that the best actors, the best musicians, the best comedians, they eventually commit suicide. It's because of the trauma. They don't know how to deal with it. They're not principled. They don't take care of mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They're surrounded by the wrong people. They just do what they do. They just act. They just do comedy. Just like you can just build a company. Or you can take care of yourself in a principled way. And what happens is, when you get slapped in the face by the real world at some point, you get humble. You understand that everything you've been told, all these pontification theories and things of folks who have never built anything in their life, you realize it's just not true. You realize how hard building a business actually is, and what that does is it gives you a new level of self-control. Helps you be more principled about what you do and why you do it, because at the end of the day, like I said, folks, we only got one chance at this. We only got one chance at this. And the thing about entrepreneurship is, in general, you don't have more than 10 chances to be successful, whatever success means to you. It takes about 3 to 4 years for you to figure out whether your startup or your vision is actually going to become reality. So if you start at the age of 20 to 25, well, you got roughly 30 to 35 years. That's about it. Then you're just going to plain out run out of gas. If it's a woman who wants to have a family, it's even less. Right? It's usually only 5 times women have. It's ridiculous. They deserve more. And it's very important to understand. It's very important to understand you only have 10 tries at swinging a backpack. 10 tries. It's not very many. But we don't think about that. And what that does is you have a choice. You have a choice going out of here today to take what I've had to say and be optimistic. Because you have new tools and a new way that your brain thinks. Or to keep doing the things the way you do them. Okay? I would challenge you to step into your power. To be courageous. To do things differently than everybody's ever told you. To be principled. To start with what your values are. Because values are scalable, folks. It brings an agglomeration of things. The right people. You know, I'll give you an example. One last example. Entrepreneurs always ask me, Gary, how do I raise money? Gary, how do I hire the best employees? You know, I can't pay them $200,000 a year like Facebook. No kidding. Neither can I. Well, what you can do is talk about what you believe in a very principled way. The thing about being principled is most co-founders never talk about what their individual visions and values are personally. They always do professionally because that's why you build a company. But they never do personally, and then about 2 to 3 years down the road, once again, when you put gas in the fire and you raise venture capital funding, that's why companies blow up. So, with that, guys, I'll leave you with one last thing. Probably can't read it, though. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. to change something, build a new model that makes the old obsolete. It's what we started with originally. It's what Buckminster Fuller said, and I hope after today, guys, you do at least one thing differently than you did before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. It was a pleasure. Probably we can arrange the slides to be shared.
Hey, you're the boss.
Somewhere.
You got it.
Okay.
Whatever you need.
We'll share them somehow via Silicon Vikings Riga network, which still needs to be created. So TechHub Riga will help spread it. So you can read the quotes later on. Thanks for coming all the way from US. And Richard, thank you as well. It's been a nice event. If you have any ideas or questions how you want to see Silicon Vikings Riga look like in the future, please approach me, write me emails, texts, whatever. Get involved. Let's, should we do this again? Should we do this kind of event again?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. So I feel happy for this. Okay, as for the next schedule, if you still didn't see the TechHub Riga space, you can still go around a couple of startups here. Not a couple, more than a couple. There's upstairs another floor where one of TechHub Riga members can bring you. Maria probably will guide you up there. And in some 15 minutes, we're probably closing this event down because we need to rearrange. In the evening, we have a closed event for TechHub Riga members and VIP guests. So thank you all for being here and for supporting this.